Hello and welcome to Real Insights. Today we're talking with Amy Blackwell, founder of Amy Blackwell Advisory.
Hi Amy, welcome to the Real Insights podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So today's episode is not about ESG. It's related to ESG, but more specifically it's about impact investing. And I know that's an area you've been working in for a long time. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you end up in impact investing.
Well, back in the early 90s, I was working for Merrill Lynch in the suburbs of Chicago and working with families, thinking about their legacy, thinking about successful successions in their wealth management and what they wanted to be known for beyond the current generation. And some of that related to philanthropic giving.
Yep.
And some of it related to preparing the next generation for the responsibility of being in that family. And as time has passed and I started advising impact organizations and charities, what I realized is that there's, along the spectrum of capital, there are some problems best solved by philanthropic capital and some problems best solved by impact capital. And certain models work best when there is a purposeful profit. And so I think that to act in isolation in a silo and only care about someone's philanthropic capital misses a strategy that could be really the middle of a legacy for a family.
Yep.
So they could care about a particular sector and they could use philanthropic capital to de-risk a project so that then you could get additional capital in to scale it, or you could have a project where there is some sort of humanitarian reactionary support, but then you need to fix the underlying problems, and that could be a proper for-profit and impact investment. And so I just think we're in such an exciting time because the impact investment market topped $1 trillion last October, according to the GIN.
Yep.
So it's not going away. It's not a nascent market. And people are seeing the real opportunity to be driven by purpose with investments that can generate a market rate return.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but certainly in some cases, there's no reason to expect that you should have to give up on returns to make a difference.
Yep. And so I mentioned that this episode is not about ESG. I think there's a lot of content, there's a lot of reports. Managers are really good now at producing ESG reports about what they do, particularly in the commercial property space. And I think commercial property is one of the largest sectors in terms of contribution to greenhouse gas and carbon emissions. So it makes sense in a way that managers tend to focus on the E in ESG. So, and I think it's fairly well established now that greener buildings tend to perform better than sort of brown buildings. You have occupiers willing to pay higher rents, and then when you go to sell the building, the marketability of it is improved if it's a green building. So there's not really any controversy around spending money on making a green building will give you at least a market rate of return. I think you would agree on that.
Absolutely. And not only will you get the money out, but you end up in a situation where all of the stakeholders, the employees of the businesses as well as the businesses themselves have better outcomes.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think and that's really the focus of this episode is the impact. So it's more related to the S in ESG is the social impact that you can get from a well-designed, well-built building which is built for a certain purpose. And there's a number of stakeholders within that. So you have the employers, you have the employees, you may have renters, residents, whoever's using that space. Now, when you think about the impact of a well-designed space, what is it that immediately kind of comes to mind for you?
Well, I mean, I think I think, first of all, it's really helpful to make a distinction between, we talk about this as not about ESG. So, when you think about ESG is an internal metric, right? It is a series of decisions made by a company to mitigate risk on operational decisions. So how are we as a company going to function with regard to the environmental footprint or our stakeholders or our supply chains? How are we going to make internal decisions about how we take care of employees? So when we're talking about the impact, the question is, are companies making a decision whereby the social return or environmental return is running in parallel to the financial return? Okay. So I think it's really important to separate that out, because you could have really not nice goods and services and still have a really great ESG score because you make good operational decisions, right?
Yep.
What we're talking about is, how do you, as a commercial developer or building a fund as an investor, how do you say to your investees and your LPs, we are driven by metrics of environmental and social concern in addition to a financial return for you that is market rate. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's about telling your story. So the people who are involved in that are, as you mentioned before, your company. What do you as a developer, as a fund manager, want to do? What does the manager of, say, a care home or a property or a business, what do they want out of it? What do their employees want out of it? What do their customers want out of it? And when you're looking at measuring impact objectives and you're setting out KPIs, you need to decide who defines success.
Yeah. So I think I've heard this, and you described it really well, but I think I've heard it quite simply described as value and values. And so the value side is where a lot of institutional investment managers do really well. It's focused on the E, in environmental, delivering green buildings, adds value for the shareholders, where sometimes they're a little bit less detailed on is the values that they have in terms of ways that they want to improve the lives of their stakeholders or so on and so forth. So that's kind of a simple value versus values. The value can be ESG focused. The impact can be you have to take a position on values, essentially.
And the data's harder.
Right.
That's, people are drawn to the data that's easier to manage and to measure. And the environmental data is more quantitative. It's understood in many ways, and it's easier to get a grips with. It's much harder to understand the S in some cases, depending on what metrics you're looking at, because qualitative data can be influenced by lots of other factors, and that's harder.
Yeah, so I think some of the qualitative things you might be talking about is, if I'm an employee in an office space, do I feel sort of more comfortable, more at peace? Am I comfortable in the workspace that I have? Do I have easy access if I want to ride my bike or some other form of transport? Do I have end of trip facilities? These kind of things. Do I have enough space? I'm not sort of cramped into a multi-desk sort of open plan layout. Is that the kind of things you're talking about in terms of the impact it can have on people's lives?
Yes, I think those are some of the variables. I think, clean air. Good filtration systems in ventilation systems, good filtered water, good lighting, spaces that have been intuitively thought through so that there's a place where you can have vulnerable conversations with someone, or a place where it isn't quite so formal, so that if you need to have a conversation perhaps with HR or an uncomfortable conversation with a team member, you've got privacy, but at the same time, you're creating an environment where people are comfortable feeling vulnerable.
Yep.
And I think that post-COVID, there is a real focus on demanding well-being, environments that foster well-being. And that's really tricky as an employer, because who gets to define what well-being is, right? This is hard. So if you're talking about how do I build a good space, right? How do I create that? And an employer is trying to meet everybody's needs. it's not easy, because what I think is great and really important to me, and I'm 54 and my children are 28, we're going to have completely different views, but you're going to have all of those employees and customers.
Yeah.
So this is where we talked previously about how do you define good, right? This is where really good feedback loops come in. Really giving people an opportunity to help you innovate for them. And that's where I think it gets difficult, because you have commercial relationships with these people. They have relationships then with their employees and customers. But the only way for it really to see innovation is for everybody to get an honest conversation going about what's working.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And from the perspective of a commercial property landlord, you can often be dealing with your tenants, who are the operators of this space, and you both want the same outcomes in terms of increased impact in people's lives who are using those buildings. But at the same time, you are parties to a commercial lease agreement, and it's often an arm's length negotiation. Things like your tenant giving you information about how much electricity they use, because maybe you're thinking of installing solar panels on the roof to reduce their electricity consumption, but you want to know how much value it's going to create for them. Sometimes they won't give you that information because they see that as being commercially sensitive, and it may give you some sort of advantage in the next lease agreement or rent review or what have you. So you're totally right. It's about building trust with all of the stakeholders who are involved in that process.
Well, and in today's world, there are a lot of people who make decisions about an employer based on those types of issues. So, yes, there may have been commercially sensitive information, but if the company that is a tenant is going to have better employee retention, because part of the story they're telling them at the point of hiring or at the point of review and conversation is, we're committed to having this company within a green space, and we're committed to innovative spaces and well-being and these things, then they're going to have better retention. And better retention means better profitability, which means that they're more likely to want to stay where they are because they have happy employees. And, as more and more companies become B corporations and have to really think about their stakeholders and their employees and their footprint, it becomes even more important that they be able to tell a story of consistency and commitment. And so I think that those back and forth conversations where it evidences for you that a CapEx for these types of improvements will benefit the eventual rentals and consistency of tenants, it will become clear to everybody as a win-win.
Yep. Yeah, and it just leads to, inevitably, it leads to a closer relationship between the tenant and the landlord, if you want to achieve those kind of B Corp goals that those companies are searching for who are occupying the building. I think one particular area, one sector where I think there's a huge potential for social impact, it's probably quite an obvious one, is in the elderly care space. So in care homes, because the residents, and I think you made the point when we were speaking earlier, they're not patients, they're residents, and they're choosing to be there, and you need to treat them like residents. So it's important we call them residents as well. Is the social impact from people that spend that much time in that space, and the way that space can encourage interaction, social interaction, is particularly important for elderly people. So I think care homes is a space where there's huge potential for social impact, and they haven't always got this right. How do you sort of think about the kind of design features that a care home can have, and how that can result in social impact for the residents who are there?
From the perspective of design elements within the space, I think a couple things are really important. One, One is, we all just have to be honest about the fact that there's a smell. And it's a smell that relates to the chemicals for the institutional cleaning. It also relates to the fact that the windows don't get open for their health and safety. The regulations on windows is crazy. And, you can't expect for airflow when you can get a window open an inch or 2 inches. And that's maybe. And you've got all these internal spaces that have no windows. And so I think part of it is figuring out how to create ventilation or air filtration that takes that. Because the people in the care home often become nose blind to it. But if you really want community to come in and you want music and you want animal therapy and you want people to come in and play games and have conversations and multiple generations to be in the space and build community, they have to want to go. So I think that's one. The second thing is most people, regardless of whether they have dementia or Alzheimer's or just are elderly, hearing is an issue. And part of the institutional creation of the spaces means typically it needs to all be industrially cleaned very easily. And so you take away a lot of soft furnishings. And the soft furnishings then don't absorb sound. Yeah. And so the acoustics are such that creates a level of anxiety where they either tune out because they can't differentiate the conversation they're having, or it's just so loud that they go back to their room.
Yeah.
And so it's about how do you set up the spaces? You typically have a dining area that's hard floor, hard chair, easy to wipe down, easy to clean. Terrible acoustics. And then you go in and there's one big area and there's a television, which because of the hearing is on really loud. So there's this ambient noise that's really distracting.
Yeah.
And so if you want to try and have a conversation with someone, it's really challenging. And they tend to then go to their room. And they're all by themselves in a room that they can't get fresh air. They can't. So I think that the acoustics and the air quality is really, really important. Thinking about creating spaces where people can confide in someone, where they can have a private conversation, where they can have, an intimate game of cards without the TV blaring, but not having to sit at the dining room table all day long.
Yeah.
So I think it's thinking about how people could use the space. That's one thing. I think the other thing is this idea of mental health and physical health being linked. I think people are not meant to be sedentary. It's just not human nature. This cohort of people who are currently aging and sitting in these facilities, they're not gym rats. They didn't spend their adult life running to the gym, right? Their physical activity and their health came from physical labor, gardening,
big one,
walking, right? So now you put them in a place where they have no access. So I think access to outdoor space that is safe is so important. I mean, just having them get their hands in the dirt and, whether that's a care home vegetable plot or pots of flowers that they take pride in and have some purpose for. And it's about creating a sense of, I got up today and it mattered because I need to do something. And that's what gets lost because they don't make a cup of tea. Somebody else does it for them. They bring it in. Everything just sort of happens to them. And they've lost that sense of social agency and participatory confidence. And so they just close in.
And so I think that they're all really great points. And if you're a care home operator, particularly if you've got publicly funded local authority subsidizing, you could think of these things as additional costs to running the care home, which they are, probably small in a lot of cases. But the research is showing that the impact of social isolation and loneliness has a terrible effect on how you age. Things like dementia, heart attack risk, all of these kind of factors associated with aging poorly are highly linked to social isolation, which tends to lead to loneliness. So the cost to the UK overall, UK Inc., is significant. And so having these features in care homes, which are designed to reduce social isolation, reduce loneliness, they're actually going to reduce the overall burden of dealing with the costs of the related health problems. So it's a great concept to kind of put forward to the local authorities about how can you build this space in order to reduce isolation. And the obvious one, which, I mean, people all think about the smell of care homes. You're right, it's the industrial cleaning products and so on. That puts young people away.
It does.
That's going to stop you from wanting to go there, wanting to spend longer amounts of time there. Maybe your children, if you bring them along, are going to complain and it kind of smells funny. That's such an obvious one. And the acoustics is another big one.
And it's hard. I mean, it's one thing. I mean, I'm sure in your experience, if you walk into an open field and you say, I'm going to build the perfect place, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. You know, it's much easier to get funding and to build from scratch because you can think about all these things. But the reality is that many, many, many people in this country will be in a care home that has pre-existed and has been retrofitted. Sure. And I think that's a real challenge because you have to be innovative. You have to take chances. You have to have investors who are going to say, well, let's try that. You know, whereas if you get big institutional investors, they kind of, it's almost like we know exactly how to do this. We walk in, we dump this concept down and we walk away, and that's profitable for us. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to walk into a Victorian series of terrace homes that have been clumped together that is now a care home and figure out how to make this fit for purpose. Yeah. And so I think it's about what you talk about with the councils and the government. I think, you know, when the social contract breaks slightly and the government can't afford to do some of the things that people expect from the government, then what has to happen in order for those things to still exist is for public, private, and charitable partnerships to come together. And there are some really great examples of councils in various parts of the greater London area having come together and really built what I would call a common agenda of saying, you know, these are the rights that we think aging population in our communities have to be participating in our community. Mm-hmm. Now, they may not be able to be out and about in a way that we would think of as a traditional way, but how are we as a community going to bring our community to them? Mm-hmm. But I think the onus is on the councils to, first of all, have the risk appetite, to accept some innovation, and to accept the fact that the private and charitable sector that can add a tremendous depth to what they can offer doesn't have to do this. They can go somewhere else. They can find another council that's more flexible or more interested in saying, let's try that. What do we have to lose?
To achieve their philanthropic goals and objectives that capital has, the council kind of has to be appealing as a partner for them.
Right. Because the thing is, if I'm a donor and I'm giving to, say, Age UK as a charity, Age UK is going to have to report their data to me in an impact report.
Sure.
Now, if they know that they can choose between supporting a council in one place and a council in another place, and one council is going to be super amenable to them coming in and offering programming and asking for a change to an area, or, you know, you've got people moving into a care home because it's now an attractive option instead of staying in their home. So in theory, the council is going to have a new family in that home, which will pay a higher council tax and contribute more to the local community socioeconomically. Then it's a win for the council not to be sending carers to that person's house. Yeah. So it's a win-win for everybody. It's net positive for the council because they get more money in, less money out. Yeah. It's great for the people who are able to be within a community that is supported. And it's great for the charitable organizations because they can report impact that's really happening in a broad and scalable way. But that means that the councils have to be a good partner.
When you, in your conversations with philanthropic capital, is the challenge, what are the biggest challenges? Something I can imagine is, how do I measure the impact that my investment is getting. And so I need data, and I need data that on what are often qualitative, sources as well. So how do I measure that?
Well, imagine that you have a company that's managing multiple care homes,
Yeah.
and you're going to go in and you're going to retrofit with some new ideas, and you're going to do some partnerships. Then you have perfect counterfactual data, right? Because you have the same management company running two centers, and then you can use philanthropic capital when there's a partnership with a philanthropy, and you can pay a statistician to build you really institutional qualitative surveys.
Surveys. Okay.
So you'd be
Yep.
talking to care home personnel, you'd be talking to family members, community members that engage with them, and the residents themselves, and getting feedback in both places so that you could really make comparisons. And there is a tremendous amount of movement toward creating quantitative information out of qualitative data.
Okay.
So it is definitely able to be measured, but what I find is that it's where it usually falls down is bad surveys. And that's where getting a very good statistician will help you. It's money well spent.
Yep.
And that way you can really understand where your goals are. It's silly, but thinking about when you think about qualitative data about well-being, I always think that there should be questions that relate to each of the senses.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yep.
if you think about someone who's older, whether they have dementia or not, right? Your brain functioning is not quite as sharp.
Sure.
And so your memories that are clearest tend to be some of your older memories. So the things that you can do that will generate those memories. So that might be that you use the institutional kitchen and you bring in volunteers, and family members bring family recipes in, and you sit in the kitchen and make, and then everyone gets a taste. And those memories of taste of
when they were
family
younger.
recipes they can be serotonin inducing, right? So that's well-being. Smells are incredibly powerful. I mean, just smelling something baking that you used to have at every holiday is incredibly powerful. And that's the same with the gardening. It's not just the touch of the dirt. It's the smell of a tomato plant.
Yeah.
It's the smell of the roses when they come into bloom. And I think it's that experiential stuff that gets lost in the sort of anonymity of I'm a patient in a care home, not a resident living my life.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think maybe the challenge, if you wanted to target philanthropic capital for this sector, is how do you package that up and say this is the impact that you're going to be getting through whatever it is, retrofitting care homes to have better acoustics and better ventilation and whatever. How do you do that? How do you show them what's being achieved? So I think surveys definitely are a great way to do it if you can get them right, and you can get the capture of that qualitative data and turn it into quantitative outputs, which is what people tend to want to see. A couple of others I've seen are the use of I think it's like a Fitbit type watch. So the residents wear those. It's linked to sort of Bluetooth within the home, so they can tell how many times they've got up, how many times they've got and had a cup of tea, just how much movement they're doing within the home, and that's obviously a big thing to maintain mobility, is if you're sort of moving around a lot more. And then, say as my mother or grandmother is in there, I have an app as well. I can sort of log in and see when was the last time, mum was up, or what's the temperature and humidity in the room if you want to get that kind of level of sophistication as well.
But that takes a brave care home operator. That's right. This is where the sector itself needs to really commit to the well-being, because if you all of a sudden say all our residents have access to this technology and the families and all of that,
radical transparency, right?
Exactly. And so to me, if I'm in a situation where I have the privilege of care home shopping versus this is my one and only option, which that's many people.
Sure.
The idea that you would have an organization that would say, we're not going to be perfect, but we're going to innovate and we're going to try things and we're going to take feedback. And that's a lot more attractive to me,
Yep.
Than someone who is, pay no attention to what's happening behind the curtain.
Yeah, exactly. But you're right. It would take some bravery and some courage on the part of the operator to go on that journey.
Yeah.
And I think there would be some teething problems. You would have more calls and things to sort out with potentially some of the children of the residents and so on. But you're going to get better outcomes.
Yeah, and you've chosen this sector as a business, right? I mean, people are entrusting vulnerable people to your care.
Correct. Yeah.
And so there is always going to be a higher level of expectation of service because the people you're serving can't always speak for themselves.
That's true. I think that's a great place to finish up as well, Amy. So thanks a lot for joining us. Really, really appreciated your insight today.
Thank you. We could talk for 3 days about this.
I think so.
It's fascinating. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Great.